Hello and welcome to my 323 League Start guide for Explosive Trap Trickster. This is a build I've been league starting and min-maxing for years now, and 323 is shaping up to be epic. The build guide will walk you through a softcore trade campaign setup and progression into red maps. Then we'll talk a bit about how to cost effectively push your DPS into insta-phasing bosses. We'll also discuss some of the changes to the skill and what it means to our gearing. Changes to this guide relative to previous guides I've put out are some new high damage deterministic crafts you can use early game to boost your damage, and since I've been asked many times, I'm finally putting out a guide that does not use a Sunblast. I'll talk a little bit about it still towards the end, but for the most part this will just be rare crafted gear. You can find timestamps if you'd like to skip around below. Let's start with the most important part of any build, and that is how does it feel to play. It is a very comfortable bosser. The damage scaling for Explosive Trap is among the best in the game, and it has a ceiling in the billions. In the league start scenario, you can expect very modest gear to unlock bossing, which is one of the most profitable things you can do in Path of Exile. Importantly, this is a trap build, and if you don't like trap builds, you'll probably not like this build. If you've played Seismic before, the scaling is a little different. You throw traps at things as you run past them, and the traps will arm and blow up behind you. For bossing, the traps can be preloaded up to a max of 22 in this build's configuration, which means you get huge damage bursts right as a boss phases in. Past a certain very achievable gearing level, you don't even see them anymore, they just end up a pool of loot on the ground. The cons are that it's not a mapper. It is not going to have the clear of a Wander or a bow build, but the mapping is very serviceable if you're willing to do a gem swap. And because it's not a clear speed build, it means that map progression will be a little slower than something like a Lightning Arrow Deadeye. This league I'm also doing my leveling recommendation a bit differently. You can absolutely play Explosive Trap from right off the beach, and I have personally done that several times, but I'm going meta campaign and using Rolling Magma into Armageddon Brand for campaign and white and yellow maps. I've done a lot of testing with this the last 2 weeks, and my campaign times were in the mid 4-hour range, and it was incredibly comfortable. I left detailed notes in the gem transitions in the League Start PoB, and also Zizaran just dropped his guide as I'm recording this, and if you're interested in a lightning trap leveling take, head over to his channel and check it out. In the leveling PoB, you'll see a skill breakdown, so Act 1 and onward. So Rolling Magma is what I pick up right off Tidal Island, and I'll use that with Flame Wall. If you shoot your Rolling Magma through a Flame Wall, you get added flat fire, which makes the early parts of the campaign really easy. In Act 2, I'll pick up Fire Trap for single target. You can actually get it right before Merveil, but I usually do in Act 2. And then in Act 3, I'm going to switch over to Armageddon Brand at level 28. It's incredible for campaign and will carry the entire thing. I'm still going to use Fire Trap for single target, and also highly recommend that you pick up Grace before getting too far into Act 4. I think you can get it a little bit earlier if you want, but Grace is really important or you're going to start to feel really squishy. You'll find detailed notes about all the decisions I make in gearing in the PoB, and I highly recommend if you have any questions, start here. This is a good place to start. I've also included detailed trees for each of the acts or most of the acts and early maps into late maps. The primary difference between late maps and early maps is a transition to Whispers of Doom so that we can run Assassin's Mark and Elemental Weakness. And then also I want to point out that you're going to want to run Flammability until you get a this cold conversion cluster. Then Elemental Weakness becomes better. For gear in the leveling PoB, I've got 2 scepters. Both of them are vendor recipeed, so if you get fire or physical tagged gems of quality and you add that quality up to 40, you can vendor recipe a white scepter and you'll get back this, basically a +1 level of all physical or a +1 level of all fire if it's 40% of fire quality. You can get these off of trade for an alchemy orb. Your helmet and chest choice are important because of our third ascendancy, which is Escape Artist. This synergizes with high ES helmets and high evasion chests. So I'm using a Kintsugi, which is a almost 2000 evasion chest, and a Hubris Circlet, which is a high ES. And these two things synergize with each other to give us more evasion and more energy shield. Otherwise, these are basically life, res. I have benched non-channeling skills to minus mana cost on both my rings, which are important. Until you get that, you can use the life mastery for skills cost life instead of 30% of your mana. That's very helpful. My flasks are just basic flasks. This is one of the first things you should do in campaign is improve your flasks. They're almost always terrible out of campaign. And then the jewels. So I have a small cluster with Enduring Composure. These are very easy to make. They're for some reason expensive on trade. Just alt spam a 2 passive armor. It's not that many. Use a medium cluster, Trap and Mine. Guerrilla Tactics is really the one you care about and the important one. Set and Forget is nice, but not super important. And these are otherwise just basically 2 modules to reduce mana cost or have crit multi or increase life. A lot of flexibility here to get whatever you need in order to fix res, or if you need some stats, do that here. I have changed the trap mastery as I have progressed late into maps, and that is to get traps cannot be damaged. So when you are fighting a boss that has AoE on the ground, your traps should not be able to be damaged according to the patch notes in 3.16. However, I have tested this and that is not true. It is currently bugged. Traps can absolutely die. If you don't have this, what will happen is the boss will sometimes delete your traps and it will just feel bad. All right, so you've made it out of campaign. What now? Priority 1 is to fix your gear. So you're going to want to find T1 or maybe T2 evasion ES bases. Either hit them with an Essence of Woe to provide more energy shield, or just pick up ones that have the res that you need on it. It doesn't matter. Just make sure that you get better bases than the ones you ran through campaign. Find a crystal belt and hit it with a single essence of zeal. So this will give you a big amount of trap and mine throwing speed, and it's very inexpensive. This is a T2 essence. It also doesn't have to be a crystal belt. It can be a Stygian if you have one of those, or maybe a life belt. 2 is going to be fix your flask. So these are almost always terrible out of campaign. In particular, you want a jade, and ideally one that has the increased evasion rating suffix. Now these two things combined provide a ton of evasion for you, which you'll need in order for Ghost Dance to proc. So you only get 3% of your max evasion rating as energy shield. So the higher this number is, the more evasion you're going to get back. Next, you're going to want to get suppression capped if you're not already. So this entire wheel here, this wheel here, all our ascendancy all the way out to spellbreaker, and then these 2 nodes. That's enough for you to be entirely spell suppressed capped without any need for it on your gear. Next, you need levels in order to do all the other things you need on the passive tree, like transition to crit, and also buy an alternating scepter as soon as you can. In previous leagues, they've been about 30 chaos, but it sort of depends on at what point you enter maps and how many people are heisting. Traps have huge mana costs, which many people use the benched Elrion craft to solve, but fewer people know that there is a useful unveil. Early league, you can find rings that have not been to June yet with an open prefix for something like 5 to 10 chaos. Find a ring with the stats you want, maybe life or res, and bench life to force a mana prefix. There are 3 of them, and you are guaranteed 1. The most useful of which is 6 to 7% reduced mana cost of skills. On my character here, I'm wearing 2 rings like this, and they dramatically reduce the mana pressure in the build. Next, we have to talk about Sunblast. For any non-cooldown based trap, it's one of the strongest items in the game and brings more damage to the table than a Mage Blood, but with the downside that the traps can no longer be triggered by enemies. You still get charges like Frenzy and Power with Skitterbots, but Sunblast introduces another delay in what is already a delayed skill. It's definitely polarizing, but it's hard to shirk off the raw power it provides. If you are interested in using a Sunblast with this build, you can, but importantly, you'll want to make a few changes to reduce your trap throwing speed, or you'll get into trap overthrow situations and not many of your traps will go off, making the build just feel bad to play. If you want to try this, I'd recommend grabbing one in standard and giving it a whirl before committing. The first league, they reworked this Sunblast in 3.19. I bought one the first day and I kept it until even after I had my Mage Blood. It was that good. In subsequent leagues, I wanted the quality of life that a Mage Blood provided, so I ditched it once I farmed one up, but it's something that you'll have to try for yourself to make a decision about how you want to play your build. Instead of a Sunblast, I'm wearing a rare belt. Out of campaign, I mentioned that you should just hit any appropriate T1 base with a Zeal Essence to get a big trap throwing speed boost. One more step you could take is once you have suffixes you care about, redeem or slam the belt. Literally all 3 of the mods available are useful, and if you land damage against chilled enemies, it's worth about 9% more damage. You can also essence spam for it, but early league I'd probably go with the slam over essencing for the chilled damage mod because your currency could be better spent elsewhere. To comfortably map, you'll want to do a gem swap, which is annoying, but I'm usually running a lot of maps or running a lot of bosses and not a lot of in between. Now note, if you're using a Sunblast, you don't have to do this because you already get a bunch of extra traps, but without it, you need to do something. Now, the swap you're going to do is increased area of effect for a concentrated effect. That'll give you better coverage, and then either Swift Assembly or cluster traps. Now, early on in the game, you're definitely going to want to use Swift Assembly because it doesn't have the less damage multiplier, but when you have more damage, I find that cluster traps is a little better because it provides an additional 5 traps that can be placed at a time, and it guarantees an additional 2 traps, so your coverage is much, much better. This build uses a Guardian's Blessing setup too, which I'll explain. In 3.22, they added Guardian's Blessing, which provides a free aura for the life of a summon. I'm using Summon Holy Relic, which follows me around, and at any point I can start a degen that will eventually kill my summon for a linked aura. Now I can resummon him, and the aura will continue on for a bit longer. I use it for Zealotry and Haste, which I use at different points depending on what I'm doing. If I'm going fast, I use Haste. If I'm preloading traps on bosses, I use Zealotry. It's not required to do this, but it's something like 30% more damage at the cost of a few sockets, and so I find it very worthwhile. Okay, so we have a bossing character. How do we make currency with it before we start bossing? This build excels at anything requiring good single target. I personally like expedition maps to farm enough currency to start bossing, and that's what I've done the last few leagues. I'll blow the whole thing up, sell the reroll currency and logbooks, and occasionally run Tujin when I have enough of this currency saved up. I'm not going to do a tutorial on how to make currency with expedition. There are excellent guides available on YouTube, but I'll say that this build is also very good essence harvest and beast farming. You can also run sanctions with it so long as you're not running a Sunblast. In patch 3.23, explosive trap has changed pretty dramatically, so now quality, instead of giving AoE, gives 2 additional smaller explosions at 20%. Now, we've never been able to scale the number of explosions beyond the helmet enchant before, so this means that things like Ashes of the Stars almost immediately become best in slot because it grants 3 additional smaller explosions. Now, when you pack more of these explosions in, it does a considerable amount more damage. Now, the reason that these extra explosions are worth more is because explosion radius doesn't change when you pack more explosions in. It looks like, also, I want to point out this base radius change is 1.8 at level 20, previously 0.6. Now, at a level like 26 or 27, Trap had plus 0.8 meters if you level it up. So to me, this kind of reads like a higher level explosive trap's not going to scale the damage, but that means that earlier in the game, you're going to have access to better AoE and better damage, which is pretty sweet. It also looks like the differential is still there between the primary and secondary explosion, which means we'll be able to tickle the AoE in order to maximize our overlaps in a way that we could previously. Now, I have a min-max guide, and I describe how you can massage AoE in order to maximize your overlaps. You can check that out. The link will be in the description. Another change in patch 3.23 is that we lost a ton of mana reduction from Divergent Inspiration, Anomalous Trap and Mine, and the loss of the boot enchants. Now, combined, if you were to go self-chill, that is a 33% reduction in the cost of skills that is gone, just vaporized. The reason this guide was actually a couple days late is because I spent a ton of time trying to make it work in a way that was manageable as part of a guide. Now, it is still possible to go self-chill. However, the costs involved to do it before you have a Mageblood are quite high. So one of the things I did was I explored building this entire thing as a Pathfinder so that I could use the benched mana reduction costs on Flask. It was a pretty significant damage loss, and it just didn't feel nearly as good as Trickster. So probably what I am going to do is recommend people go self-chill after they farm a Mageblood, and that is way beyond the scope of a League Start guide, so that is something you can look at my min-max guide for, but know that self-chill is going to be much harder to do now. Next, I'm going to go over some upgrades to the build to push it a little bit farther into the end game. So this PoB is still not min-maxed by any stretch of the imagination. You know, I still have a +1 amulet. I'm not using, you know, Giga crafted rares, or I don't have temple mod gloves or anything like that. There's still a long way to go. I'm going to put a link to my min-max guide in the description where I push this up to about 250 million DPS. But this is a way that this is a stepping stone to a fully min-max guide. I also took out Forbidden Flame and Flesh, Impossible Escape. There's nothing that's extremely expensive in this particular build. All right, the first endgame upgrade I'm going to make is this Thorn Rapier. Now, you can use an Apex Rapier or a Thorn Rapier. Either is fine. It's really about the dex requirement, because the thing we want is the 35% crit multi. The rest of it is just a stat stick for spells. I'll show you how to craft it really quick. All right, Craft of Exile, One-Handed Sword, Thrusting, and we want Shaper. At level 83 is what you want. And the thing we are looking for is to essence for a single suffix that we care about. So I tend to think that crit multi is the best, followed by faster attacks. We're going to go Essence of Scorn, so it's 11 to hit any tier of crit multi, and faster attacks probably reduces that to something, yeah, 9. So 9 essences. You need an open suffix and an open prefix. Now, when you essence something, there is a 60% chance that it's going to be 4 mod, a 30% chance it's going to be 5 mod, and a 10% chance it'll be 6 mod and fill all of them. So you have it, it's in your favor that if you hit the mod you want, it's probably going to be hopefully an open suffix and prefix. If not, YOLO and all, it's fine. It doesn't take that many to hit something useful here. Now, the thing we're going to do after we have an open suffix and an open prefix is switch over to the emulator. This is what we essenced. We've got our essence mod here and crit multi and an open suffix and an open prefix. Now, in order to take the next step, we're going to go to our bench, crafted. We're going to go suffixes cannot be changed. Now you can't use a wild bristle matron here because you need the open suffix. We're going to go suffixes cannot be changed and delete all of the prefixes. That's 2 div. And then we're going to spend 1 more div to go to our suffixes and hit cannot roll attack. Now we have 3 prefixes and almost all of them are tagged attack. So if we do this, oh, look at that. Damage pen 5%, T2 of fizz is extra cold, and T2 of fizz is extra fire. This is an epic weapon. I would absolutely use this. And then we're going to go to finish it with something like trap throwing speed. This is considerably better than even a +2 gems. Now the reason this works is if we go back and take a look at our one-handed thrusting scepter, all of the non-attack mods are non-existent. There's only one. It's +1 to level of socketed gems, and it's very low weight. So 1,000 weight. And if you look at the shaper mods, they're the 3 that we actually want, and they're 3 times as heavily weighted. So this is as close to deterministic crafting as you'll ever get in Path of Exile. 9,000 of the mod pool are the mods you want, and 1,000 are the mods you don't care about. And all it takes is 3 Exalt slams, and you're most likely to have this as an outcome. Now I have to say that it's not like a 9 times out of 10 you're going to successfully craft this, but most of the time you will. And that's because you block more of the mod pool as you exalt things. I also don't think I mentioned why I wanted faster attacks earlier, and that is because I am using a movement skill that is attack based. So leap slam is the movement skill I use, and having faster attacks on the weapon is beneficial because it frees up a socket in my gear. The next thing I'm looking for is a +2 gems chest. It can be either AoE or trap or mine gems, but explosive trap scales significantly with levels all the way up to 30 and then logarithmically after that. And so getting +2 gems on your chest is a big damage boost, and it's something I'll be looking for as early as possible. There are also some other chest options. It doesn't have to be Kintsugi, but Kintsugi is quite tanky. You can use a Cospri's Will, and then that will give you an extra curse and some chaos res, and you can recover 4 of these passives to use elsewhere. That's a good choice. Queen of the Forest is also good, but bow builds will also want that. You could use something like a Shadow Stitch, which comes 6 link, which is nice. Another upgrade I'll be looking for is full cold conversion on my gloves. Now you only need 50% for explosive trap because the skill itself does 50% conversion to fire, and you need only 50% to go to cold. Now I have 25% on my implicit and a benched perfect 25. That means you have to elevate twice, but having full cold conversion on my gloves means that I don't have to have this mastery anymore, and that frees up 5 passive points for something else. Another thing I could do but I haven't here is craft a +2 gems amulet or go for a replica dragon fang. Both of those will be more damage than this +1 with crit multi on it. I have a guide to crafting a rare, which a very well crafted rare is going to be better than a replica dragon fang, but a replica dragon fang is going to be a very close second. It's super strong because you get 3 levels and some RMR out of it. These are the same rings as before. This time I have the Redeemer mod with increased damage with hits against chilled enemies. You can either essence for this or slam it onto a belt that you like. It's not terribly expensive to do. The next thing I'm going to do is grab a Taste of Hate. Taste of Hate is really strong because we get Fizz's extra, and it also is a bit of defense as we'll get a little bit of our damage taken, our physical damage taken as cold damage. I'm really excited about this next one. So ever since Sanctum went core in 322, it means that the Balance of Terror is back. And in my opinion, by far the best one is gain 30 to 40% physical damage as a random element if you've cast Ellie Weakness in the past 10 seconds. Now, Ellie Weakness is a best in slot curse for us, but it means you have to self-cast it. So in my skills here, I have, let's see, Elemental Weakness by itself. I bind Elemental Weakness to my right click, and so I will right click Elemental Weakness right before a boss spawns in, and it is a huge chunk of extra damage. I think this is something like, yeah, almost, so a little more than 16% extra damage just from this one jewel. Next up are some improvements to our cluster jewels. So I'm using 2 larges with Battle Hardened, Force Multiplier, and Iron Breaker. These are very easy to craft as long as you have the right eye level cluster. If we go over to our buddy Craft of Exile and we look at cluster jewels, large cluster, fizz cluster, you'll see that the ones we want are eye level 50, eye level 1, and eye level 50. That means we can exclude basically the entire remainder of the jewel if we pick the right eye level. So I use an eye level 50 through 67. Sometimes those are a bit more on trade depending on how many people are aggressively sniping them. But let's do this. So let's do eye level 55, proceed, and we're going to use a one socket jagged. One socket resonators are easy to come by, and a jagged gives us more physical, and all three of those are tagged physical. So very often you're going to hit 3 because they're all tagged physical, and this is cheap to do. And as a bonus, if you hit something like this is also going to work fine. You just want battle hardened and Ironbreaker, but if you don't get the 3 that you want, often you'll get a 3 that somebody else will want, and you can sell this cluster for profit. In fact, I do that often on League Start. Next, I switched over to a medium cluster that is crit based, and this is so that I could change my Amulet Anoint to Dreamer instead of High Voltage. High Voltage is excellent, and it's a very cheap way to get 100% crit chance, but Dreamer helps us out a little bit more in the mana cost department. So that particular medium cluster is this. It has Eye of the Storm, which grants 20% increased effect of non-damaging ailments, which gives us more brittle and more crit, 40% increased crit strike chance. This is the best one, and pressure points. Now, Eye of the Storm, if you go and take a look at Craft of Exile, is the only lightning damage notable, and so we can isolate that with Harvest and target craft it. So let's go crit chance, yeah, lightning. So there are only 2 mods, and it is a, let's see, probably a 1 in 4 to get Lightning Storm. And then really any of the other ones is great. Pressure Points is the best one. Something like Precise Tech Retaliation is also great. There's some good crit ones here, but Eye of the Storm that gives 20% increased effect of non-damaging elements is the best by far. All right, our last 2 upgrades that I'm going to go over are a Thread of Hope Large, which allows us to travel a little more efficiently between Blood Siphon, Saboteur, Assassination, and Mark the Prey. You could also take Clever Construction, which is a very strong node. I just didn't take it here. And then a Lethal Pride. So Lethal Pride is great in this slot because often we're strength starved, and this provides us a ton of strength. We also have a bunch of dense pathing around here, and you can get things like double damage. So I think this is a 2 double damage one. These aren't terribly expensive, but not until people start running 5-ways. So don't expect to have this opening weekend, but it should be available at some point. It's worth saying that there are a bunch of really strong Forbidden Flame and Flesh Jewels. I don't have them in there because last league they were wildly expensive thanks to Sanctum inflation, and I wanted this budget to be approachable. But I wanted to talk real quickly about them. So Ambush and Assassinate, in my opinion, is the best one. Culling Strike, 50% more damage against low life enemies, and a ton of crit multi on full life. And this is 100% more critical strike chance too, not 100% increase, 100% more. So if you can get to 50% and hit a full life enemy, you're going to get a probably max brittle out of it. Another strong one is, let's see here, Opportunistic. Opportunistic is great defensively and fights like the Feared, and also provides 25% more damage in fights like Ubershaper. Harness of Void is another really strong one. And I'll also say there are some really good defensive ones in Saboteur, like Pyromaniac, which grants Ignite and Shock immunity, which is, Ignite in particular is really annoying, and 10% regen. And things like Born in the Shadows, which would be a purely defensive one. 50% reduced damage from blinded enemies is quite a bit. There are also some really strong impossible escapes available. So this one in particular is one I usually run, Necromantic Aegis. It gives you access to both of these nodes and Ash, Frost, and Storm, which is very strong. Or you could do Glancing Blows, which will give you another tireless, let's see, 5, 15, 20, 25. So access to 25% increased life and another 15% reduced mana cost of skills. And there are other ones too. If you've got mana solved, there are plenty of really interesting places you could drop an impossible escape. Lastly, I looked at 40 or 50 PoBs, and the questions were, a lot of them were the same. And so I wanted to touch on them here in this video so that I could start you here. And then if you needed help later, I could look at it. First things first, if you are struggling defensively, ask yourself these questions. Am I spell suppression capped? I had one person send me a PoB with 60% spell suppression and wondering why I was getting one shot in red maps. You need spell suppression. It is one of your best defensive layers. You should have it. Next, what is your evasion rating? Are you above 82% evade chance? If not, you should work on getting there. because evasion, this isn't a right side build, it's evasion based. Next, what does your ES pool look like? If you have 400 or 500 ES, it's not going to be doing very much, and Ghost Dance is not going to be doing very much for you. So you need to get a decent ES pool. This is important. A lot of your sustain comes from taking a Ghost Shroud and turning that from high evasion into a full, again, energy shield. This is a very, very strong defensive mechanic. Next, I have endurance charges in this build. I use endurance charges because they're one of the best defensive layers in the game. And if you don't have them, you should probably look into getting them. I highly recommend it. And there are a couple ways to do it. Enduring Composure is, in my opinion, the best way to do it. But you can also get Enduring Cry. You can left click it. It will also heal you, which is great. But you usually would want something like Call to Arms in order to make the cooldown manageable. Next, the build is weakest against Degens, so dot damage. The thing that I do to prevent that is I would use Arakali and Chikari. Both of these are very strong defensively against dots. Lethe Shade is also very strong defensively against dots and in fights like the Feared. I'd also recommend probably getting Ignite immunity on a flask right away. You could also get ailment immunity on your boots by essencing for a reduced shock effect and then getting the implicit so that you have 100% on your boots, and then socketing a Storm Shroud somewhere in your build. Next, I'm going to get ahead of some quick QA on offense. So why does my DPS feel bad? And my first question for you is, are you crit capped? Is this number right here 100? If it's not, you need to consider getting it to 100. So take this wheel or anoint high voltage or get a crit medium. There are lots of ways to do it. One important one is make sure that you have this critical mastery. The 50% increased effect of non-damaging amulets is probably the best one in the entire build, and it provides a ton of additional brittle. Don't get the crit multi one. If you had to choose one, you would choose this one. The other thing is avoiding conditional crit. So right now I have some on the tree here, and that is so that I could drop a diamond flask. Relying on flasks for crit doesn't feel very good because it's conditional and not up all the time. This feels so much better because I have 100% unconditional crit. And the last thing I'll point out is, what level is your gem? So this is a level 21. If we go down to an 18, there's a huge drop off in damage. A lot of PoBs that I looked at last league had low level explosive traps. Get yourself a level 21, especially this league is going to be a little bit different because you absolutely want quality. You'd rather have a 20-20 explosive trap than a 21-0. Because the extra explosions are so worthwhile. So I don't know what a 21-20 is going to cost, but if you can't get one, if you can't make one yourself, you're probably going to want to buy one. All right, folks, I think that is just about it for the League Start guide. I have a mid-max guide if you're interested in pushing this build a little bit further. And I think I'm due to create some more crafting guides. I haven't updated them since 3.20, although most of them are still relevant. That might be the next project. Anyway, I hope you have an awesome league start. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up, and we'll see you in a few days for 3.23. Take care.